From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. A production of iHeartRadio.
Hello, welcome back to the show. My name is Matt.
My name is Noel.
They call me Ben. We're joined as always with our super producer, Paul, Mission Control Deck, and most importantly, you are here. That makes this the stuff they don't want you to know. Do you guys remember growing up in the era of talk shows? Like the Donahues, the Winfreys, the Springers?
I mean, when I saw them, it was when I was staying home sick from school because that was all daytime stuff.
Yeah.
So, it would be, you'd be flipping around and you'd see people throwing chairs at each other and talking about taking a DNA test to prove parentage of children in question.
Yeah. And you remember these two, right, Matt? Do you remember?
Yep.
Yeah. Phil Donahue always stood out to me because of his mop of hair. I never figured out whether it was real. But
it looked like a little furry animal kind of seated atop his dome. Yeah.
And never did a show about that, did he? Maury Povich was in particular, that show became associated with the idea of paternity tests so much so that it became a cultural trope. Paul, if we could play a clip.
You are not.
So we remember this stuff, and for a lot of people, it was the sort of bread and circus entertainment pre-DNA. It was a fun time. It was like any other proto-reality television. There were performers there, paid actors pretending to be real-life people. For a lot of folks, it was a good cathartic time. They could vicariously experience messy drama. But tonight's episode's about the darker side of this topic, a genuine series of conspiracies that at times spiral out of control. We have to ask, what on earth is fertility fraud? And I think we have to be honest. Like when we get into this, before we go, thank you for tuning in, fellow conspiracy realists. We are well aware this can be a very sensitive, challenging topic for a lot of people. It's inherently personal, it's your own origin story. So I say we treat it with the care and respect it deserves, unlike some of the doctors we're going to talk about. Does that sound good?
Oh, yeah. No, we certainly try to do that with everything we discuss. But this one is, you're right, very sensitive because having children is something that is sort of a huge part of the human experience, if that's something that you want to do. And if you are not able to do that, it opens you up to some potential fraudsters or people that can really manipulate you emotionally.
Here are the facts. If we want to understand this concept, fertility fraud, which sounds like an evening news buzz term, because it is, we first have to understand the concept of fertility. Let's get that out of the way real quick. Fertility is being able to reproduce. And then there's this other thing, which is part and parcel of our conspiracies this evening, the concept of in vitro fertilization, or IVF, as it's known on these streets.
Yeah, in vitro fertilization is one way a couple, no matter who they are, can attempt to be impregnated if one of the people in that couple has a uterus, right? It's a really interesting process. And again, it's only one. I think we should describe the other one first before we get to in vitro, because there are several types of this. Right. I have personally gone through several. That's why it affects me personally, guys. I've personally gone through with the old ex-wife there several rounds of something called IUI, which is intrauterine insemination. That is where semen is taken from a host,
a donor. Yes.
Yeah. In this case, it was me. And it is put into a catheter type thing, like a little turkey baster, and then put into the person that has a uterus through the cervix and injected in there to attempt to impregnate somebody. Went through that several times unsuccessfully. Hey, there's a little kid back there. that was made, which is kind of nice, miraculously.
That would happen in an analog fashion?
Somehow, some miraculous way. Yeah, but that is one way. In vitro fertilization is quite a bit different, though.
Yes, yeah, you're right. And I appreciate you pointing that out, Matt. The intrauterine and in vitro things that you're talking about, these procedures, they all come under the umbrella of what we call assisted reproductive technology, or ART. So that's our second acronym. There are other forms of art. There are always other forms of art, right? There's ICSI, intracytoplasmic sperm injection. There's GIFT, gamete intrafallopian transfer. There's ZIFT. It's a whole thing, and art is. Let's think of it this way: it's a group term for a cavalcade of procedures and techniques which are all designed to create a viable embryo that will gestate and become a life form. This also applies to non-human animals, right? There have been this technology has been applied to certain endangered species. It's been applied to animals in conservatories or preservations or zoos. But most people, when you think of art, you're thinking of IVF. About 99% of the assisted reproduction technology in the United States today is IVF. This is coming from a release from the CDC in conjunction with Department of Human and Health Services, or Health and Human Services, from March 13th, 2024, where you'll see that IVF, per their research, represents the vast majority of ART procedures.
And I think we were honestly all a little bit surprised to see that stat. It just seems like you can't get much higher than 99%, can you?
Well, yeah, it's just weird to represent at least 3 versions of that 1%, if that makes sense. That's just weird in my personal experience.
Yeah, and these things are not a silver bullet solution, to be absolutely clear. We know that this art is a relatively new concept in the grand scheme of things. You know, the first, IVF, the quick explanation is doctors will attempt to fertilize an egg with sperm outside of the uterus and then implant that egg into the uterus in hopes of a successful pregnancy. It does not have a 100% success rate, and that's because the very first baby born from IVF is alive today. Louise Brown, 1978. She's still relatively young or middle-aged.
Yeah, and the next was born, or the next baby born of IVF came later that same year in India. And then before we knew it, this really was starting to become pretty widely adopted, at least for families of a certain social strata, let's just say.
Yeah, it is an incredible procedure because it's almost like you set off that biological chain reaction, right? The moment you fertilize the egg in a laboratory setting, in a petri dish, basically, and that kind of thing, it becomes a zygote. Those cells start splitting. Then you got to get that thing and implant it right within the uterus safely. And then for that to then go full term into a baby, that's incredible. That's an amazing technology.
Guys, it's probably a bit of a dated term and probably a bit derisive, but is this where the term test tube baby comes from?
You're absolutely correct. The term test tube baby, prominently featured in the amazing animated film Bebe's Kids, comes from this the rollout of this, which was quite accelerated, because this was solving a problem that a lot of families struggled with and a lot of individuals who wanted to have children. It met a crucial need for people across the planet. Many of these people would prefer not to adopt. We'll do an episode on adoption in the near future as well, but they knew they would be good parents.
Oh, of course. And, another option might be surrogate. situation where you have someone carry your baby to term with the sperm of the partner. That's certainly an option. Also expensive and a little fraught in its own right.
Sure.
But man, adoption, Ben, that's something that I've had questions and thoughts about for a long time. Just all of the politics of that, and when other countries get involved, and there's so much to unpack in that. I very much look forward to that conversation.
Politics and pitfalls. Yeah.
Let's just get this out of the way too, guys. Infertility is like one of the most soul crushing things you can deal with if you actually want to have a child.
That's
and
right.
You do feel like you would be okay parents, or you're in the right place, right? Or that thing from Idiocracy at the very start of the film where it's like a couple.
Right.
We talked about it multiple times on the show, but it's a couple that has. They're thinking about everything they need. Like, do we have enough money? Are we in a good place? Like, what's going on in the world right now?
And they're
Should
like
we have
both
a child?
Doctors or lawyers or something.
Like successful, intelligent humans, and they're like, well, I guess it's time to try. But then, one or both of them is infertile and they can't have a child. It's just very common. Again, personal experience here, and it is like one of the things that'll send you down a real dark place in your life.
Like I said, it's such a good human experience. It's just part of being alive is to be able to, carry on your legacy. Not to think about it in terms of like, I've got to carry on my legacy or whatever, or be immortal in some way, but it is just you want that. You're driven towards that, especially if you're someone who is capable of giving birth. That's like your superpower. And then to realize that you don't have that, you've been robbed of that. I can only imagine that it would be very, exactly like you said, soul crushing.
Again, it doesn't matter who you are, right? Or how you function, or what parts you got. If you can't make another version of you genetically, it's that your biological imperative kind of gets muted or, turned off, or you're just not, your DNA ends at you, which is a weird thing to think about.
Life is brutally narcissistic from an evolutionary standpoint. It wants more of itself out there.
I think both of you are making excellent points. I think the takeaway here, though, is that it's not a narcissistic desire to want to spread your DNA further. It's almost like there's a computer code within you that is programmed to need that and want that. It is like what you are designed to do. And when you can't do that, it's like you failed at that function or something. And then your body almost like, reacts or has to reconcile that in some way.
And obviously the point, the mention of the M word of narcissism is not applying to anybody specific as an individual. It's the system. It is how life works. The virus, right, on the very edge of what humans consider living, its main thing is to create more of itself. That is the biological imperative, right? Life is a light fighting against the darkness of entropy.
It is funny, though. I mean, maybe not funny, but when you do start to think about that biological imperative and how we as humans are kind of viruses. And we self-replicate and ultimately kind of smother everything around us. Started to turn into a dark, bummery direction, but when you can look at it that way too. So
it's not untrue.
So infertility affects millions of people in the United States today. It affects billions of people in the world, and indeed, we can see some troubling indications that infertility rates may rise, depending on where you live in your neck of the global woods and what environmental factors you are exposed to. Big factors for infertility right now are going to be health conditions, often caused by environmental variables. And then there's going to be, the age is always a question, but to the earlier point, and I have family members with in these situations. There are couples who are maybe same-sex individuals, or there are people without a partner and they could not otherwise conceive, but they would be amazing parents, and they are. Shout out to several of my family members there. I mean, the success of this is clear. The success of IVF in particular. In 2021, in the U.S. alone, 86,146 infants were conceived through the use of some sort of ART, assisted reproductive technology. That is 2.3% of all of the births in the entire country that year. That's a lot of people. And if you're listening, we're glad you're here. If you're listening and you're like, what, 3 years old?
Yeah. Welcome. Right. Welcome to Earth and to the podcast.
Welcome to Earth. We would have cleaned it up if we knew you were on the way.
Probably not.
Yeah, well, we could all do a little better, right?
It's not all on us. We do our best. We do our part.
Right.
But no, this is really very, very, very true. The scientific breakthrough, from the late 70s has continued to help many, many couples and individuals to do that thing that they so desperately want to be able to do, which is to spread life.
And to the point about to the point about idiocracy, Matt, I love that you're bringing that up, because people also use preservation services for their eggs. The street name
freezing.
would be freezing the eggs. Yeah. You can also save sperm or other reproductive tissue and say, hey, I really want to be a parent. I am not ready at this point, but I don't want to miss out on that opportunity. So this is a huge industry. There's a lot of money inside of it. And right now, there are 10 states that use some form of ART most often. The last one was a bit of a plot twist on my end.
Yeah. Well, California, obviously. New York, sure. Texas, maybe, okay. New Jersey.
Checks
Illinois,
out.
Massachusetts, Florida, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Georgia. I mean, and I was surprised by that too. Is that because this is considered in some way like interfering with an act of God? Would there be a thinking behind this that maybe religious right-leaning individuals in lawmaking might have a problem with this type of technology?
I don't know. It's a good question. It may simply be a feedback loop of clusters of expertise, right? Because this is a specialization in the medical field. I mean, it's impossible to overemphasize the life-changing importance of these treatments. A lot of us listening along tonight, our fellow conspiracy realists, may have undergone IVF or may be alive as a direct result of these techniques, which is amazing. We have to give tremendous thanks to all the doctors and medical professionals who work to make this possible. I mean, imagine the enormity of trust that your patients are putting into you for this, right? Be a part of the most important aspect of my life. If everything's above board, these doctors are making the world a better place, one family at a time. If everything's above board, what happens when that trust is misplaced? What exactly is the fertility fraud conspiracy? We're going to pause for a word from our sponsors, and we're going to dive in. Here's where it gets crazy. Fertility fraud. It's real. It is extremely gross. And unfortunately, just like ART, it is an umbrella term for some unclean things.
I had not. I'd heard of this as a concept. It makes sense, given especially since a lot of these things by very nature don't work out. Even if it's all done above board, even if everything is done correctly and with the utmost care and scientific rigor, very frequently these pregnancies do not become viable. So therein lies the perfect opportunity for a grift, right? Oh, it didn't work out. Well, sorry. Maybe next time. Let's try again. Jesus, but what we're about to tell you, there's a bit of a trigger warning here, y'all. This is like some very gnarly, abusive stuff we're about to talk about.
Yeah, most commonly fertility fraud, when you're going to hear it in popular culture or popular news, it describes how a fertility expert, a doctor with a specialization in this, may lie to their patients, and they're overwhelmingly dude doctors. They lie to their patients, and instead of giving the patient the sperm of their partner or the sperm, whatever the surrogacy situation may be, the doctor puts their own sperm into the patient. It is impossible to overstate how disturbing of a violation this is.
I don't understand why. To what end? Like, why would you do that?
Narcissism.
Is it that? Is it just psychopathy, sociopathy?
typically it's going to be deleterious narcissistic disorder. The idea, like, that's why we introduce the N word at the top there. These guys are propagating their own genes and not taking responsibility for their children.
Because, like, on the one hand, it reminded me of some of those fraudulent crematoriums that would, just give whatever ashes back to the families, and like to me, I was thinking this is some kind of shortcut to save you from having to do actual work, but it doesn't seem like it's that at all. It's literally like a secret rape, and impregnation for your own malicious and like you said, Ben, narcissistic reasons. I just couldn't wrap my head around it at first, but that's clearly what it is.
Well, and there's levels to it too, because depending on the type of artificial insemination, again, if you're just applying a batch of sperm cells to some eggs that have been separated out from both bodies of whatever couple is, attempting to become pregnant, that is one thing. It's a whole other thing if you use the IUI technique, where you're literally turkey basting your own semen into a woman. That is very different, I think, which is also something that has occurred.
Both horrific and egregious, but that one is just, ugh.
They're both true. And fertility fraud can also additionally describe cases wherein donor eggs are taken or even sold without the donor's consent.
But this would be a surgical procedure of some kind. Minimally
invasive.
Got it.
So you're not going to have scars and stitches. It's not at the level of, for instance, a cesarean section or something like that. But there are other things that fall under the broad term fertility fraud. A lot of insurance grifts, a lot of unnecessary, expensive procedures, because you can kind of milk people for money if you are a terrible doctor. And they all leverage social engineering. How much do you trust your medical professional? And they exploit the desire of so many people to become parents. Unfortunately, tragically, there aren't really words in English for how bad this is. There are multiple examples of doctors engaging in these unclean things. In the nation of Israel in 2000, there were these doctors who were harvesting extra eggs from patients seeking fertility assistance, and then they were selling those eggs without the patient's knowledge or consent, much less a slice of the profit.
And by the way, I just did a little Googling, and the procedure to remove eggs, it's minimally invasive. It's like a needle that goes up, and then it identifies where the follicles are, and then it sucks them out with sort of like a hollow needle. So it doesn't require being cut at all. So I could see how, you could put one over on somebody and grab a few extras and keep them on the side. It's ugh.
Yeah, as we said, minimally invasive, no scars. If you are the patient, you may not realize what has been done to you for some time, which makes it even more dangerous. One of the most infamous recent examples of the doctors being monsters here comes to us from the Netherlands. A guy named Dr. Jan Karbaat, may his memory be a curse. He's just the worst guy. From 1980 all the way to 2009, he ran a clinic that was one of the biggest fertility clinics in the entire country of the Netherlands. It was also a site of rampant fertility fraud. Nobody knew about this. We are not native Dutch speakers, so let's crowdsource this. Bijdorp?
It could be a soft J, perhaps.
Oh, Bijdorp.
Bijdorp? I don't know. Just a thought.
Yeah. It's near Rotterdam.
Just throw it into the crowdsourcing here.
It's near Rotterdam.
Okay, yeah. I think probably a soft J then. In Barendrecht, as you said, near Rotterdam. In this clinic, semen from different donors was... This is just another callback to the ashes situation, mixed together. Oh, God. Women were lied to about whose semen their child had been derived from. And record keeping was absolutely chaotic. Dare we say no rhyme or reason at all to any of the record keeping, probably by design.
Yeah, I would say non-existent, because he was an active predator covering his tracks. We know now that he is the direct biological father of at least 49 children, proven from patients who visited his clinic there in Rotterdam, and he used his own sperm instead of the sperm that, these couples were giving, right? We want to conceive, in some cases, like, we've been married for years. Please help us, Dr. Karbaat. And he says, sure. And then fertilizes the egg with his own emissions. And at this point, no one knows how many children this guy created as a result of his insane conspiracy. Now, I don't use the word insane lightly. Everyone's certain, though, it's way more than 49.
It's like a God complex kind of situation.
Guys, let's really think about this. And hey, if you're listening with kids in the car, turn it off. Turn it off for a little bit. Skip forward 30 seconds. Ready? This person masturbated himself 49 times at least, at separate times in a room somewhere, and then took that sample and had to put it into a specialized cup to protect it, and then took that sample and did this procedure very carefully and very,
methodically.
It is so monstrous when you think about that number of times. And those were the successful times that we know of that he did it, which means he probably did that hundreds of times.
At least. He probably has about 200 kids.
Oh, yeah. And this is we're telling you one person that did this. There are over 50 other cases in the U.S. of men who did this same thing. Mm-hmm. And we're going to get to it. But this is one person that did it that many times. It's just it makes me want to do bad things.
It seems like the same kind of compulsion that drives serial killers and serial rapists. And it just seems very akin to that. And to be such a specific thing that you're just going to do over and over again because you're chasing some kind of high from it or something. It's just, oh man.
So let's continue with the Karbaat case, because it is just like those U.S. government numbers on infertility. This is a snapshot of, indeed, a global pattern. Shout out to our friends at The Guardian. They have a great blow-by-blow investigation into this issue. If you want to learn more about the Karbaat case in particular, do check out Dutch fertility doctors secretly fathered at least 49 children from 2019, which is over 4 years ago now when it comes out. They got a lot of this information with the help of a fantastic nonprofit group called Defense for Children, a global organization fighting for children's rights. Karbaat did this for decades, again, 1980 all the way to 2009. This didn't go public. It was kind of an open secret for a while, but it didn't go public until 2019. A Dutch court ruled that the results of Karbaat's DNA test, which he denied for the entirety of his life, should be made available to parents and children with questions. The case involved 22 people who had, for a long time, been petitioning Dutch courts to have their own DNA samples compared to that of their parents' fertility doctor. And Karbaat, for the entirety of his life, managed to dodge this, refused to cooperate with investigators.
We're gonna get into this too, guys, but one of the reasons that it's been difficult to charge these doctors is because the laws in various places don't cover this specific act as something that is even illegal.
Right. Before 2004, Dutch courts had, up until 2004, before they reversed the decision in the Netherlands, if you were a child born to donors of any sort, you had no legal right to learn the identity of your biological parent. So if you are I said I wasn't going to curse on today's episode, but this is so nasty. Paul beat me here. If you are a monster, this is a perfect crime, right? If you are one of these Karbaats.
Well, until 23andMe and other DNA, like commercially viable DNA,
which we'll get
came out, which is
again
less
convenient.
Part of the story here.
Yeah. Oh, it is. Yeah.
So for a sense of scale, about 10,000 children were conceived at Karbaat's clinic over the length of its lifetime. Yeah.
Insane.
And we want to shout out the journalist Camille Balouk, spent 3 years investigating the case. He has published a book based on his research, which has a lot of interviews with Dr. Karbaat himself. It's called All Louis's Children, and it's fantastically written. It's a real rough read. You can also, if you want to save your time on the book, you can check out on YouTube right now. You can check out an interview that Vice had with the journalist Balouk himself. What you'll see is disturbing. Dr. Karbaat has no remorse whatsoever for his actions, which are clearly meditated. He is a times 9,000 this guy. And he had, you might ask, were there any consequences for him? Not in this world.
Well, because you mentioned the law was had at the very least what you consider a loophole, and he was clearly very aware of that and used it to his advantage, right?
Yeah. And just before the case goes to court, he dies. It's 2017. He's 89 years old. He never faced a mortal court. He also had already, we mentioned open secrets, in interviews with journalists, with his non-consensual children. Well, I guess every child is non-consensually born.
That's fair.
Right. But you see what I'm saying? Like, there would be people trying to track down their own provenance, their own origin story, and they would find this guy at his home, at the clinic, just walking around, and they would say, "Hey, are you my father?" And what he would do, is how much of an open secret it is, he would say, "Hold up your hands." And he would just compare hands with them because he would never take a DNA test. It's so creepy.
I imagine in the journalist's piece that you mentioned, some of these children are part of that story as well.
Yes. Yeah. His interviews with them, and a couple are cited also in the Vice News summary, the interview. And, maybe it's like a confirmation bias, but if you watch the clips, you'll look at these folks and think, are they related? Or am I racist? Do all Dutch people just look alike to me? But I think they look similar, and the DNA will later go to prove it. The worst part is, so this guy's never going to go in front of a mortal court. He is also only one example of a troubling trend, and we have a lot more to discuss. As you set up earlier, Matt, so astutely, there are many, many people who have been doing this grift and getting away with it for a long, long time. Should we take a break for a word from our sponsors?
Yep.
We've returned. Even before the success and the economy of scale of IVF in 1978 in England, there were people like Quincy Fortier, a Las Vegas-based fertility expert who, during his 40-year practice, definitely created 26 children without the consent of the women he was impregnating.
And just to drive home, these are all officially licensed physicians.
Right.
They're not perpetrating fraud in that aspect, at least, right? This is like, they're not running some fly-by-night, pretending to be experts.
That does happen, but
I'm sure it
does.
But in these cases, these were all truly licensed doctors who had been through all of the proper training. They just happened to be sick individuals.
Yeah, and Quincy dies in 2006. He's 94 years old. People don't uncover the full extent of his crimes until 2018, when a lady is celebrating her retirement with a home DNA test and learns the truth. And then there's someone, like, to the point about, there's something, I know I always rail against this, and I only sound like a broken record because it is true. technology always outpaces legislation. Legislation reacts to technology, and as a result, is always playing the game of catch up. Let's go to a guy named Cecil Jacobson, 1980s, Virginia.
Yeah. According to this guy, there was a bit of a problem where he worked. When someone came in, a patient came in, wanted to get pregnant, wanted to have help getting inseminated, they would only have access to sperm that was frozen. And, well, that's not going to work. So this doctor decided, well, he would use his own. This is in the 1980s. His practice ran from, 1976 until 1988. And he fathered as many as 75 kids.
Right. Yeah. And he could not, and he was discovered. He could not be prosecuted because he had operated this obscenity in Virginia entirely. And at the time, there was no law in the Commonwealth of Virginia to prohibit this crime. Nobody thought anybody would be conceivably this messed up. You know what I mean? They had not conceived of the horror here. And we can go on and on. You know, there's Norman Barwin in Ottawa in 2021. We could go on again. There's Donald Klein from 74 to 87, and we could go on. Like this
Let's name some more. Dr. Merle Berger in Massachusetts, Dr. Christopher Herndon and Dr. David Claypool in Washington, Dr. Paul Brennan Jones in Colorado, Dr. John Boyd Coates III in Vermont, Dr. Morris Wortman, and Dr., as you said, Klein in New York.
Dr. Donald Klein. Yeah. Oh, and then there are further consequences like those posed in Connecticut. Burton Caldwell may have made some folks unknowingly, accidentally incestuous. It is important to know where you come from, right? And it is important, like, this is just, this bothers me so much. And we talk about so many evil things, but this one gets to me in particular because part of it is at this point virtually impossible to know just how many doctors successfully conducted these types of conspiracies, right?
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, one I thought was worth mentioning because it also involves that weird loophole in Dutch law. And I believe we discussed this a while back on a Strange News episode.
Strange News, yeah.
Yeah, it was a Dutch man who is suspected of fathering more than 500 children through excessive sperm donations. And I haven't seen an update yet as to what he's being held liable for, but he was facing a fine of more than 100,000 euros, but only if he tries to donate again. He's been banned from donating to fertility clinics in the Netherlands, had been actually since 2017 after it emerged that he had fathered more than 100 children, but instead of stopping, he just took it international. Right. And he was actually tried in The Hague, which is like where they try war criminals and stuff. It's just kind of wild. But in the end, looking like more than 500 children, between 500 and 600 children since he began donating sperm in 2007. All we know is his name was Jonathan.
Yeah, and as of 2023, he was 41 years old. I remember bringing that to our Strange News program, and one thing that stood out to me about this was, again, the legislative lag. Let's call it that, because if you're traveling internationally, I think he spent some time in Australia as well. It's difficult to track these activities, and he started donating sperm in 2007. We have a short form social media video about it, which is sort of whistling in the graveyard of these evil things. And I just want to say, like, I appreciate you guys so much for allowing us to bring that story to light back in our Strange News, and for doing the sketch, which does hold up.
That was your Strange News story, right?
Yeah, thank you for letting it get on the air, man.
No,
because we control what you say, Ben.
Actually, in the BBC article that I just found, it referenced a lot of these cases that we're talking about as well, because it is sort of like, while this guy wasn't a doctor, it does show the flaws in Dutch law that led to this being possible.
You're talking about Emily McGarvey, right?
The writer. Yeah, that's right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yep. This is a real thing. And that's, I love that you're bringing this up, Noel, because that's adjacent to, as you said, that's adjacent to this problem. The legislation is the issue, right? We were talking a little bit off air before we recorded. I have been against the dangers of the commercialization of genetic testing for a long time. It's going to be very challenging for human society in the near future and in the long term. It's a whole other bag of badgers, but in this case, no matter what we think about the economy of scale, the monetization of DNA, this technology is the only reason we know about a lot of these crimes, right? There is a good side. It is good that this stuff exists. But do you think that laws will be written to combat this?
Yeah, there's HR 3710, the Fighting Fertility Fraud Act of 2023, that's currently sitting with the House Committee on the Judiciary at the House of Representatives. It's just been sitting there since 2023 in May, I think. It could potentially be a thing in the future. And there are other states like Texas that have passed laws that specifically characterize or classify fertility fraud as like a thing that can be prosecuted, where you can actually go to jail for years for perpetrating these kinds of acts. I think 10 years. You could go one crime. So like one count of fertility fraud would be 10 years in prison, which is awesome. Let's do that. It's just kind of hanging out now, though, in limbo. But thankfully, there are other states that are trying to get things on the books like this. So hopefully that's in the future what we will see.
Agreed. And that's what we can do. We can hope, we can raise awareness. We also have to say that, this rank conspiratorial pattern leaves us with some serious things to consider as a civilization. It goes beyond national borders. The answer, it's, I would argue, part procedural, part philosophical. There is some stuff that unscrupulous doctors don't want you to know, and they are getting away with it. They have been getting away with it. I don't know, man, just like on a positive note, this is hard for a lot of us to hear this evening, but family is family. We need to give a heartfelt thank you to all the parents out there who are raising their children well. Whether you are an adoptive parent, a biological parent, a step parent, it matters not. Every child deserves a parent, deserves a family, and family can't be defined by biology alone. Let me get off this soapbox. This one got to me. Sorry, guys.
Dude, I think you got to all of us for various reasons, just human reasons, but also, Matt, I appreciate you sharing your own personal story and, connection to this topic.
Yeah, man. Right on. It sucks. It really sucks. Really, really sucks. Well, hey, if you want to learn more about this stuff and for some reason you have a morbid curiosity, maybe, you can check out a couple of documentaries that exist on the internet right now. If you have Netflix, you can check out, that one's Our Father. That's what it's called. Our Father. It's about Dr. Donald Klein that we mentioned. And on HBO/Max, whatever that thing is now, I think it's called Max. You can watch Baby God. That's about Dr. Quincy Fortier, Fortier.
Mm-hmm. And
God again, complex, right? I mean, it's right there in the name.
Yeah, you can also, again, if you want to learn more about the doctor from the Netherlands we spoke about specifically, do check out the book, All Louis' Children. We can't thank you enough, folks, for tuning in. We want to hear your thoughts. Should there be more legislation prohibiting things like this, right? Imagine committing a crime of such a heinous nature, and the law is not able to prosecute you because they have never articulated a law against it. What do you think is the solution? What are your personal experiences? We would love to hear from you. We try to be easy to find online.
That's right. You can find us at the handle Conspiracy Stuff, where we exist on Facebook, on YouTube, and on X. FKA Twitter. On Instagram and TikTok, we are Conspiracy Stuff Show.
Hey, do you like to call people? Why not call us? Our number is 1-833-STDWYTK. It's a 3-minute voicemail that you can leave, only up to 3 minutes. Give yourself a cool nickname and let us know in that message if we can use your message and name on the air. If you've got more to say than can fit in that 3 minutes, why not instead send us a good old-fashioned email? We are
the folks who read every single email we get. Give us an essay, give us a haiku, give us a limerick, hashtag no pun left behind. Take us to the edge of the rabbit hole. We will do the rest. Be well aware, folks. Sometimes the void writes back. How can you prove it? Reach out and touch space. Conspiracy at iHeartRadio.com.
Stuff They Don't Want You to Know is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.